Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to this review of the Panzerkampfwagen T25 German Tier 5 Premium Medium Tank. Now, this is not to be confused with the Skoda T25, the Czechoslovakian Tier 6 medium tank, despite the fact that they're basically the same machine historically. In terms of the game, they are not. So, historically, what do you have? Well, we're going back to the whole Panther thing. The Germans, in response to the T-34, they wanted something that basically did a similar thing with angled armour and a punchy gun. So they put out a call, sent a call to a variety of companies to submit designs for a new generation of medium tanks. Specifically, the Daimler company and the MAN company were both invited to submit proposals for the design of a machine that would eventually become the Panther here. Now, the Skoda company, which were a Czechoslovakian company, and Czechoslovakia had been annexed by Germany, and so they were making equipment for the German army, although generally speaking they were making light tanks or converting machines into tank destroyers, that sort of thing. They weren't invited to take part, but they thought they'd have a go anyway. And so they also submitted a design for this same brief. However, the Skoda tank, as well as the company not actually being invited to submit a design, they also didn't, strictly speaking, fulfill the brief. So the brief that the German army had called for example, the implementation of the L70 75mm gun, which is the gun we see here. And the Skoda company did not do that. They did put a 75mm gun on the tank, but it was a 75mm gun of their own design. And the resulting proposal was the T25. It was to use a 75mm auto-loading gun. And, well, here is the machine. It was rejected by the Germans for two main reasons. Firstly, because they had not invited this proposal from the Skoda company, and so they weren't interested. And secondly, because it didn't use the required gun. Now, actually, if we look at it, and if you look at the Czechoslovakian design, speaking personally, I think the Germans were right to throw the design out, although my reasons are different. My reasons are essentially twofold. The Skoda design was was less heavily armoured, although it did have sloping on the armour, but was less heavily armoured than than what would become the Panther. And it didn't use that 75mm gun that had been called for. And so if you compare the Skoda T25 to later models of the Panzer IV, which was of course already in development, you have to start asking yourself what the actual advantages would have been with going with the Skoda design. And the answer is not that exceptional. The gun wasn't as powerful as the L70 that the German High Command wanted. The armour, although now sloped, wasn't as thick as the German High Command wanted, and the really novel thing about the tank was that it mounted this 3-round auto-loading gun, but honestly you could argue that the gun was perhaps ahead of the technology of the time, and I wouldn't have been surprised if it had problems with reliability, and even if it had worked properly, the Skoda would have burned through its ammunition supply in a frighteningly short amount of time. So I actually agree with the German decision not to go with the proposal. Although, if the Panzer IV, later versions of the Panzer IV, hadn't already existed, I think this could potentially have been a decent tank. Anyway, what we have in game is this design without the 75mm auto-loading gun. If you do want the 75mm auto-loader, then you look at the Czechoslovakian tech tree, you go to Tier 6, and you find the Skoda T25 with that auto-loading gun. But this tank comes from an era before Wargaming were considering implementing the Czechoslovakian tech tree. So this is when they weren't thinking that was going to be on the cards, and so this was implemented into the German tech tree. And it's not the only machine to be in the German tech tree as a premium that is not actually a German tank. So, what do we actually get? Well, we're going to talk more about the gun in a moment. As I mentioned, it's a 75mm gun, but it's not a 75mm auto-loading gun. It's a single-shot weapon. It's, where is it? It's about a 20-ton tank, making it rather lighter than the design that eventually won that proposal, of course, which was 45 tons, so this is half the weight. With a 450 horsepower engine, giving it a specific power, actually, of a very impressive 22 horsepower per ton. with a top speed of 60 kilometers an hour, which sounds really good. This thing will move like stink. Now, we need to just calm down for a second, because there are two things that come to bite you in the backside here. Firstly, the stated traverse speed of 32 degrees a second is not very good, and secondly, the ground resistance values are not very good. So what we actually get is a tank with reasonable acceleration, good top speed, but it turns like a barn. So, okay, we need to bear that in mind when we're talking about the mobility. Concealment, I'm not going to worry too much about that, because these values, there's so much in the background of the game about how camouflage works that they're not necessarily all that meaningful. The view range on this tank is pretty shoddy at around about 320 meters before you include equipment. And for a tier 5 tank, well, even the other tier 5 medium tanks, they tend to have a view range of around about the 350 mark. If we look at the tier 3, we're looking at... Oh, actually, that also has a pretty poor view range, though that's still better. But the view range is not great on this tank. We will talk more about the armour in a little while, but just to say for now, it's 50mm on the side, 45 on the rear, on the side. 50mm on the front of the hull, of course, 45 on the side, 35 on the rear, and the turret is 60, 60, 35. There is some angling going on, but honestly the armour on this machine is not to be relied upon, so don't rely upon it. So, that gun. Well, you just get the one gun. This is the 7.5cm Skoda A18 weapon. 14 rounds a minute, which is not bad. 116 penetration, which is also not bad. I mean, when you consider other guns at this tier, you've got the American 76mm with about 128 pen. So that's got about an extra 10 penetration on top of this. The German L48 75mm has 110. 116 is there or thereabouts, with 110 alpha damage, which again is it's average for a 75mm gun found on a tier 5 medium tank. 167 penetration with premium ammunition, which is APCR, is not too bad, and it has its uses, and it's your pretty standard 75mm HE rounds with 38 pen and 175 average damage. So those values are all kind of there or thereabouts. The dispersion at 100 meters is a rather underwhelming 0.41. That is not good. I mean, it's not the worst at the tier, but it's not good, and the aiming time of 2.5 seconds is also not good. Couple that with rather uninspiring bloom values, and what you get is a gun that's not very accurate, especially on the move. Unlike many German tanks, this isn't really a sniper. And actually, if you look at that rate of fire compared with the alpha damage and you work out the DPM of this machine, you end up with just over 1800. At least with my equipment loadout, which is, well, compared to the other tier 5 medium tanks, it's not the worst, it's alright, but it's also far from the best. So, there's that. One thing to note, of course, about this tank, I mentioned the armour. One thing I didn't mention is that it gets 610 hit points, which is a lot for a tier 5 medium. Usually your tier 5 mediums are clocking in at about 450. What about the Turan? That has 570. The Shermans have around 450, for example, ditto for the Panzer IV. So 610, that's enough to take an extra hit or two, depending on the gun shooting at you from them, and thus you'll survive a little bit longer. So that is quite nice to have. In terms of equipment and whatnot, well, ammunition, you get 60 rounds of ammunition with this gun. I have 50 AP, 5 APCR, 5 HE. I don't really use the APCR or the HE that much, it's mainly the armor piercing, but I've got them just in case they're necessary. Standard bits of equipment, I don't see any massive problems with going with that. I've got a gun rammer, vents, and I've ummed and ahed over this third equipment slot. Binocular telescopes, it's an option you could go with, and it's the option that at the moment I'm favouring. If you go with coated optics, you don't really have the base view range. 10% of rubbish is still not very good, basically. So I wouldn't recommend coated optics. Binos do give you that extra boost to view range, and it makes you more useful in tier 7 games. The other option I think you have is an enhanced gun laying drive, just to improve that aiming speed. This is a tier 5, so you don't get the option of mounting vertical stabilizers, of course. So that third equipment slot is probably up to you. Otherwise, you could go for binos and then swap out the vents for the gun laying drive. I guess that would also be an option. Crew skills, well, just use whatever a German medium tank crew you have. If you're going to have a dedicated crew for this tank, which I wouldn't recommend, but if you are, it's nothing particularly special. 6 cents on your commander, safe stowage on your loader, repairs on everyone else. And then repairs and smooth ride, snapshot, all that good stuff that you usually have. It's nothing particularly surprising here. So let's go and have a look at the armor profile, weak spot locations, some gameplay, and round things off in the garage. So if we have a quick look at the module locations, you can see here in the front of the hull, if we're looking at the tank frontally, on our left hand side, you've got the radio operator, not that usually anyone really cares where he's situated, and the driver sits on the right here, so each one is behind one of these little hatchy type things. From the left hand side, we have got the commander here toward the rear of the turret and the loader toward the front of the turret. And you've got, well, notably fuel tanks here toward the rear of the machine. And an ammo rack here right under the turret. So if you were aiming at the side of a T-25, the left hand side, if you aim at the hull underneath the bottom, the rear half of the turret, sorry, then that is where your ammo rack lives, which is interesting to note. And of course you've got the driver here at the front. From the rear of the tank, it's basically taken up by a big fat engine, which is pretty standard for most tanks. Again, toward the rear of the tank, this is from the right hand side now, you've got fuel tanks, so in front of the engine, front and to the side of the engine. Gunner up here in the side of the turret, and here below the turret once more you've got an ammo rack now, whereas on the left hand side of the tank this ammo rack was basically under the rear part of the turret. If we flip back, as you can see there, on the right hand side of the tank it's pretty much under the entirety of the turret, so if you aim somewhere under the turret you're probably going to hit the ammo rack from the right hand side. Basically aiming underneath the turret, regardless of which side you're looking at, stands a reasonable chance of damaging the ammo rack. From the top, nothing particularly interesting to note. So let's just go and have a quick look at the armor profile. Actually, just before we get onto the armor, one thing I wanted to quickly mention is the gun depression, which I haven't talked about yet. It is a quite impressive 10 degrees, so right the way round the front of the tank and the sides you get 10 degrees, and it's only over the back where it goes to, well, 7 degrees, and 7 is still not bad. But 10 is very good. German tanks very rarely get 10 degrees of gun depression unless they're some modified version of an existing machine. And tanks in general tend not to get 10. So 10 really is very nice. So, moving on to the armor. Don't let this large blocks of red and dark orange fool you. The armor on the T-25 is not phenomenal. So from the rear, it's just the only reason I tend to talk about rear armor is just in case it's possible to penetrate it with high explosive. You're looking at around 35mm of effective armor, so you could penetrate this with kind of 75-76mm high explosive rounds, though it wouldn't necessarily be too reliable. Depends on the gun you're using. Side of the tank is 45, which is not great. I mean, even if you angle this pretty extremely, you're not really going to get much in the way of effective thickness until you hit an auto bounce angle. So this side armor, however well angled in most situations, is only really going to bounce very low tier machines, maybe tier 3s, that face this thing. Frontally, it's a similar kind of story. Sorry. Front of the hull is 50mm thick. Good bit of sloping on it, but 50mm at the end of the day is 50mm. You're only getting 55 effective armor. Lower plate 61. Front of the turret is 60. Still not getting much effective armor out of it. The roof is 35mm thick. However, it's angled back at such a slope that you can get some bounces off of that, but no one's going to be aiming at your roof when they could just aim to shoot straight through your turret. In terms of the gun mantlet, well, you can get kind of 130 odd armor in places. So if you're going to bounce anything, it's probably because they've hit the turret roof at an extreme angle, or hit the gun mantlet, or hit some other part of the tank at a very extreme angle. The point I'm getting at is that most pretty much, I think, every tier 5, I can't think of a tier 5 that would struggle to penetrate this. Every tier 5 is going to penetrate this tank with ease. Tier 4s aren't going to have many problems, sorry. Tier 3s, yeah, depends. So the armour is only really useful against those very lower tier tanks, and let's not even talk about the tier 6s and 7s that this thing can come across. And when you're in tier 6 and 7 matches, those HE shells start becoming a real nuisance, as they can actually do a lot of damage. I mean, a 122mm HE round, for example, would really ruin your day. So the short version is that there isn't a lot of armour on this tank. Here we are then with our first spot of gameplay. So, as usual, we're going to have one top tier game and one bottom tier game, just to give you a flavour of the sort of things you can expect from this tank. And also, the two games you're going to see are not the most phenomenal games I've ever played in the tank. So you're not going to see ace tankers or anything like that. So, for this game, it's obviously a tier 5 game, as I've already mentioned, and we are here on Ensk. Now, Ensk, this is Ensk, isn't it? Yeah, Ensk is quite a small map, and there's our first victim. This is the Czechoslovakian tier 3, is it? Just going for a second shot, see if we can make that work. And initially, well, I'll be honest, this is a little bit of a nothing position. It's not a position that I would recommend you going to or anything like that. And the only reason that I'm able to sit here, really, is firstly because there have been some bushes hiding my shooting of a number of these guys. But also because with this only being a tier 5 match, the view ranges of most tanks in the game are pretty shoddy. But also most people don't necessarily know all of the good positions and don't play that strongly, or don't play that well, so I am able to actually use the position. Now, I made a point of saying the armour is not particularly good on this tank, but a Panzer 1C is one of those targets against whom my armour is actually worth something. Not that it looks like I'm going to get to use it against him. I think that German Panzer, no, may have killed him, but either way he didn't shoot me. Now against a Hetzer, it's, well, no. Hetzer, KV-1S, nah, the armor's probably not going to do what I want it to, but nonetheless, one shot into the KV-1S there. But you can see, hopefully, every time I move, haha, we say I'm on fire, you can see every time I move just how much the aiming circle blooms out. The bloom stats on this gun are pretty poor. The aiming stats are not very good. And I'm actually taking quite a lot of shots, not really fully aimed, and getting a little bit lucky, you could argue. Now, I've no idea why the enemy artillery has pushed this far forward. That seems to be like a bit of an optimistic move, but never mind, I guess we'll take advantage of it. I take one hit there, don't notice, however, that there's a wreck in the way of my shot, and manage to pick up the kill on the artillery with my next round. And that leaves this Hetzer, who's also getting shot in the rear by a T-28. Miss my shot, and the T-28 picks up the kill. There's only 3 of them left now. Skoda T-24, Grilla, and an Su-122A. Now the Skoda's an interesting target, because of all the tanks in the Czechoslovakian tech tree, it's the one that most closely resembles this machine, despite the fact that this machine is actually the T-25, which is the Czechoslovakian Tier 6, but never mind. But there you can see, although the DPM on this machine isn't fantastic, and the reload isn't fantastic, it's better than the T-24, and the other thing you can see there in this game is, despite the fact that my armour isn't fantastic, and I'm not sure if my armour has actually done me any good this game at all, my health pool has. I'm on 410 health. Oh, sorry, I have 610 health, I'm left with 20, which means I've taken 590 damage. If I'd taken 590 damage in most other tier 5 medium tanks, I'd be dead. In fact, if I'd taken 590 damage in most other tier 5 tanks, not just mediums, I'd be dead. So that 610 health points really does come to your aid, but it is at the cost of some armour. Having said that, as a general rule, the tier 5 medium tanks are not a particularly well armoured bunch anyway, so I'm not really sure you're losing out on too much. Now, I'm loading up the high explosive here to try and deal with the artillery. 38 penetration and 175 average damage, so very standard 75mm HE rounds. And there you can see put one into the griller. I load an AP round for my next round just to try and guarantee the kill on the guy, but someone else manages to pick it up. But there we go. That was the game. So what did we get to see in that game? You probably, hopefully, got to saw the quite poor bloom values on the gun and hence the quite poor aiming stats on the gun. You got to see that it's relatively fast in a straight line when we were going down the centre of the map at the end looking for the enemy artillery. You got to see what the reload on the gun is like, the HE shell performance, which is pretty standard of 75mm guns of the tier, if we're being honest. You got to see that the armour isn't fantastic, but that the hit point pool is quite nice and can keep you going in games where other tier 5 tanks would have struggled. So let's go and have a look at the post-battle results for this one. So, a long game that was not, but what did we manage to do in the interim? Well, that game ended up being enough for first class mastery, which is not an ace tanker. You know, I said these weren't going to be ace tanker games, but it's still not a bad showing. Bruiser, duelist, fighter, and fire for effect ribbons, and the high caliber medal. May only be a tier 5 game, but it's still nice to pick up a high caliber medal. Indicates that you've been doing a fair amount of damage. So 1,453 damage done, 4 kills, 933 base experience, and you can see that although I consider that game, you know, it's a decent game, but it's not an absolutely fantastic hard carry or anything. But we still did way more damage than anyone else on our team. And approximately an extra 50% on top of what the next highest damaging tank achieved in the game, which was actually the enemy Skoda T24. And we also had the highest kill count, which is quite nice. 21 shots fired, 13 hits, 13 penetrations. There are those poor aiming stats for you. And that game on Ernst was very much the the Panzer T25 in a close range engagement situation. Total damage, 1,453 damage done, and all except about 100 of that was at point blank range. Received 5 hits, and as I predicted, despite being top tier in that game, all of them penetrated, so the armour really didn't save us there, but we still finished the game alive. 1 enemy tank spotted, 7 damaged, 4 destroyed, 4 base defence points for all that it matters, and about 1.4 kilometres travelled. And even with a standard account, we made a profit of 27,000 credits, 31,000 gross income, fairly insignificant resupply and repair costs, and bearing in mind that's 2,300 to repair the vehicle, and we only had 20 health left, so we lost most of our health. And so we actually walked away from that game with a respectable profit. If we'd been running a premium account, it would have been a 43,000 credit profit. So that is quite nice. But nonetheless, that was when we're top tier, so let's go and take a look at how things fare when we're at the bottom of the feeding pool. As promised then, this is a game with rather less favourable matchmaking. T25, of course, gets regular tier 5 tank matchmaking, and thus plus or minus 2 tiers, so this is the tier 7 game that you can see in this machine. We're here on... You know, after playing this game for 4 years, you'd really think I'd remember the names of the maps. Karelia, there we go. And it's an assault game, we're on the attacking team. So we're not going to be in this game for any more than 10 minutes. Now, I decide that, as I'm bottom tier in this game, I'm going to do something that's a little bit risky. So, on the assault map on Karelia, the position I'm going to go to, or what some of the positions I'm going to try and go to, have been nerfed, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. So basically, if you can rush right across the middle of the map as the attacker and get right under this ridgeline, you can be spotting a whole bunch of the bad guys, and that allows your allies to shoot them up, which is clearly a good thing, especially as, generally speaking, despite the fact that you're assaulting, you tend to find there are quite a lot of campers who sit up on the hill at G7, so you might as well make them useful and give them something to do. Now, you have to be a little bit careful when you do this. Hello, Mr. T34, and he's got himself in a pretty dodgy position, because you know, you can, of course, as you're moving across to the enemy's ridge line, you can, of course, get yourself shot up quite badly. And that's, again, where the T-25's speed comes into play. It may not be a very agile machine, and it might have a turning circle the size of continental Europe, but it does manage to make it up to quite a respectable top speed. So far, we've managed to spot an enemy KV-1S and a Jagdpanther. And there was an enemy T-34 who decided he was going to come down and try and have a go because he thought he was hard enough, putting himself in an absolutely terrible position in the process. He managed one shot into me. I got 3 or 4 into him, and my allies finished him off. So all things considered, I think that was a pretty poor trade from his perspective. Enemy KV-1S here is getting shot at, and on the basis that he might move backwards to try and get himself out of line of fire from whoever's shooting at him, I aimed behind the rock formation, hoping that he'd reverse into it, but alas, my wish was not fulfilled. Nonetheless, this used to be a very, very powerful position to get into from which to do spotting. It's still not a bad position to use, but it was nerfed a little bit. Nonetheless, I'm going to use it and see what we can do. Now, I'm playing this rather aggressively because, at the end of the day, ouch, I am a tier 5 tank in a tier 7 game. And that I've said this in other videos, that gives you an element of freedom. If I take a pretty high-risk, high-reward strategy, which is what I've done, and it goes wrong, then at the end of the day, the team has only lost a bottom-tier tank anyway. So I'm not going to have as much impact on this game as, I don't know, an IS or something. But if I have a good impact on this game as the bottom tier tank, if my high reward aspect of my strategy pays off, then I really can be a significant boon to my team. If, however, I were to do this with a top tier machine, and it doesn't pay off, then I really, my death or severe maiming has really been a significant hindrance to my team, and so I don't really want to try that. So these sort of strategies where you go into high risk, high reward positions, I tend to prefer doing in my bottom tier tanks, as it gives you that, well, that degree of I guess almost bravado or confidence that even if it does all go horribly wrong, you haven't completely screwed the game for your team, which is nice. And we managed to pick up a kill on a top tier tank destroyer, which is also nice. So no complaints there. And the scoreline is now 10-4. So getting into this position, I'm not saying that this has been the only thing that our team has, that has enabled our team to get up this good scoreline. Hello, Mr. T20. Can I shoot you? Nah, he actually bounced. But getting into that position has been useful for my team. It's given the campers something to do, some people to shoot at. And it's allowed me to actually make some use of my bottom tier tank, which is always nice. Using that 10 degrees of gun depression. I'll be honest, before making this review, I didn't realise that the T25 had 10 degrees of gun depression. There we go, I managed to set him on fire. I've had 2 games in this video, and they've both involved fires. Panzer 4H fires, looks like he's using the howitzer. Put some more damage into him, and he gets taken out. Can we shoot the AMX there? Nah, it doesn't really look... Oh, maybe, come on. I want another tier 7 kill. 53 health left. Come on. Ah, spoil sports. I could have had 2 top tier kills, and hopefully that would have been a Leverschleo's medal or something. Ah well, never mind. There we go. That's the game. Let's go and have a look at those post-battle results. So there we go, another quick game for you there, hopefully showcasing mainly the speed of the T25 and what that allows you to do. And also what you can do in your, not just the T25, but when you're bottom tier in general, and the kind of thought process that I personally have. Now, I'm not the best player at World of Tanks, but it's still the thought process I have. I'm better than average, so some people may find that useful. So, the actual result itself, what did we get? Well, first class mastery again, bruiser, fire for effect, that's the ribbon I was thinking of, and a Confederate medal, and Confederate's another one of those awards that I quite like getting, because again, it shows that you're kind of contributing. You've shot a lot of guys. So, yeah. Actually finished at the top of our team by experience in that game with 1,043 base experience. And you might think, why did you get more experience than the previous game, even though you did a comparable amount of damage? Well, it's because, as will become apparent in a moment, despite the fact that we got fewer kills, 1 compared to 4, we got some assistance damage, and we were often shooting higher tier opponents. So if you look at the tanks that we actually shot at and damaged, AMX M445, tier 7, Jagdpanther, tier 7, T25-2, tier 7, KV-1, tier 5, Panzer 4H, T-34 and Wolverine, all tier 5. So a mixture of tier 5s and tier 7s, and in the previous game, of course, we were shooting no higher than tier 5. So 19 shots fired, 16 hits, 14 penetrations for that 1,525 damage. Again, most of it from relatively close range. With the dodgy accuracy and poor aiming stats on this 75mm gun, you're unlikely to really be doing a lot of work from long range. Received 2 hits. Again, our armour did nothing, so that's 2 penetrations. Both of which were actually from tier 5 tanks. Spotted 3 enemy tanks, which were the KV-1S, T-34 and T-67. We didn't spot that Jagdpanther, though we did get some assistance damage on him. And 8 enemy vehicles damaged, 1 destroyed, and 719 assistance damage. And if we look at the profitability of that, because we got some assistance damage as well, we're up to 35,000 credits profit. With a standard account, with a premium account, would have been up to 54,000 credits profit. So these tier 5 premium tanks can bring in a good amount of money. And just to say, if we go back to this screen, one way you can look at it and go, well, we had a pretty good impact on the game, was that in a tier 5 medium tank, in a tier 7 game, not shooting any premium ammunition, we finished 3rd on damage, only behind the number 1 spot, which was the friendly Black Prince, who is 2 tiers higher than me, and the enemy AMX M4 in 2nd place, which is also 2 tiers higher than us. And also a shout out should probably go to our friendly Panzer 4H, who also managed over 1,000 damage in a tier 5 tank. So there we go. I hope you kind of saw from both of those bits of gameplay the sort of thing that you can do in the Panzer T25. So the Panzer T25, tier 5 German medium tank. What do I think of it? Well, you know what? I actually quite like it. I can't put my finger on why, but I have fun playing this. I find it a good little tank. On paper, when you look at it, you think, well, the gun's alright, but it's not great. It suffers from kind of lowish rate of fire for a gun of this caliber, pretty horrible aiming stats, and the accuracy's kind of naff. And the armour's, well, actually pretty shoddy. And the agility is terrible. I mean, the only thing really going for it is good straight line speed. And, to be fair, a lot of hit points. But, I don't know. I just have fun in this machine. But I'm afraid I can't, as I say, really put my finger on exactly what it is about this tank that I like. But I do like it. So I guess I do recommend the Panzer T25, but I'm not really sure why. I mean, I suppose if you're looking to purchase a tier 5 premium tank, it's not a bad option. It's 1,500 gold at full price, and I would recommend, as I always would, I would recommend you wait for it to be on discount before purchasing it. But, okay, put it this way. When you can consider that you could get the Panzer S35 blah 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 tier 3 for 1,000 gold, or for an extra 500 you could get the Panzer T25, which will actually make you some money, it looks like a pretty good option, and it will make money. I mean, you're never going to make as much as a tier 8 premium, but you'll make a respectable sum of money, and it will do it fairly reliably. And you can do it at tier 5, which is still, generally speaking, a pretty fun tier to play. And, yeah. It doesn't cost you as much as the higher tier German medium tanks. I mean, if you look at the regular German tech tree, so we're not talking about tanks that have been in the game but subsequently removed, or that only come along for sale on special occasions. Just those machines that are available all of the time from the tech tree. And you wanted a German medium premium tank to train your German medium tank crew, for example. You're looking at the Panzer S-35, the Panzer T-25, and the Panther 88. And if you take all of those and compare them, I would say that the Panzer T-25 probably gives you the best bang for your buck, to be honest. I mean, the Panzer S-35, as I mentioned, I guess if you're a seal clubbing fan, you might like it, but there are better seal clubbing machines out there, especially as I believe that tank gets full matchmaking, but don't quote me on that. But, like I said, for an extra 500 gold on top, you could get the Panzer T-25, which at tier 5 will actually make you some money as well. And in order to get the Panther 88, the price tag goes from 1500 gold to 7,300. Which is, for the sake of argument, a factor of 5 difference. A factor of 5 would be 7,500. So close as damn it. The Panther 88 is 5 times the price as the Panzer T-25. Does it make 5 times the credits? No. No, it doesn't. It makes a good amount of credits, but it won't make 5 times the credits. Now you can see I don't own it, but tier 8 premium tanks, you know, don't typically make 5 times the credits. I mean, I had one of the decent games I had in the Panzer T-25, and it wasn't an ace tanker game. One of the decent games I had was about, and I showed you, was about a 33,000 credit profit. In order to get 5 times that, so 150,000 credits from a game, you would have to have a phenomenal game in your tier 8 premium of choice. So, yeah, it's, I don't know. I just think it probably gives you, if you're looking for a German tier premium medium tank, yeah, some of the tanks come up for sale now and then, but I would say it probably gives you the best bang for your buck, especially as when you look at discounts, the most discount you typically see on a Panther 88 tier 8 is probably around about 15%. Maybe 25% if you're really lucky. Tier 5 premiums are sometimes on 50% discount, so you could actually pick the thing up for 750 gold, and for that, bargain. I thoroughly recommend it. I'm not saying the tank's going to be to everyone's taste, but it's a good little machine. And if you compare it with the other tier 5 premium tanks in the game, so let's just remove the German restriction on that, and have a look at some of the other tier 5 premiums that I own. Let's ignore the Turan 3, because I own it, but I haven't yet played it. So, of these ones, we've got the Matilda 4, which gets preferential matchmaking but is incredibly slow, relies quite heavily on some pretty bad premium ammunition, and basically has a terrible gun, so this is not a good moneymaker. You have the Type 3 Chinukai, which is okay, but very much a gimped version of an existing tank in the game, i.e. the Tier 5 Japanese, the Chinu, so it's kind of hard to recommend it. And the Matilda Black Prince, which while I have a little bit of a soft spot for it, you can't really call it a good tank. So, given that bunch, I'd say the Panzer T-25 is, in my opinion, the best of the lot. So, I guess long story short, do I recommend you to buy this tank? Yes. Yes, I do. But I can't... It's economical. It makes you money. It's... and I find it fun to play, though I can't for the life of me put my finger on what it is about the tank that I find fun. But yeah, I recommend it. Wait for it to be on discount, buy it at half price, pay 750 gold, voila. You've then paid 750 gold for a tank that you can fairly reliably make sort of 20-odd thousand credit profit in, or, okay, depending on your skill level, you can fairly reliably make a reasonable profit in, even with a standard account, and train up your German medium tank crew at the same time. It's a good little tank. So, yeah, I recommend it. A lot of fun to play. And not actually a sight you see that often. Yeah, you occasionally see the proper Czechoslovakian versions of the machine and similar machines, but the German one, you don't see it that much. It's kind of a rare sight, and I kind of like the aesthetics of it. I like the way it looks. So, yeah, go and buy it if you get the chance and you're interested. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that review, possibly even found it informative. If you did, as ever, by all means feel free to catch some of my other videos, and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.